Alright, let's get one thing out the way first. This game has nothing to do with gearboxes, aliens, colonial marines. I know that sounds pretty obvious to most of you, but I cannot tell you how many tweets and messages I've received asking me to review this game because, quote, they got burned by colonial marines. No, Randy Pitchford's jazz hands are nowhere near this. It is instead developed by Cold Iron Studios, a San Jose-based studio that formed back in 2015, and if you've been following this, you'd know that this is actually their first game because they've been bought and sold like 3 times in the last few years, and that causes a lot of complications, especially when they're making a licensed product. There were certainly concerns that Alien's Fireteam Elite was essentially just vaporware, as the studio would either lose talent or lose rights to the franchise, or just get bought by someone who wanted them to make COD maps or some bullshit. But no, much like Ripley, this studio survived, and the game is here. How is it? I actually think it's awesome. Alien's Fireteam Elite is a simple but extremely competent horde-based shooter. It's unambitious in the best possible sense of the word. It's not trying to reinvent the horde-based cover shooter with convoluted bullshit for bullshit's sake. It's simply doing what we already know works. It's uninterested in reinterpreting or updating the Aliens universe. It just delivers a faithful rendition of it. The developers did not waste their limited budget on adornments like lip-syncing or cutscenes or a lot of things. They just put all of their money into making guns that are fun to fire, spaces that are fun to move through, classes that are fun to play as and with, and aliens that are fun to shoot. This is a very simple, focused, finite title made by people who knew what they were making, knew how to make it well, and never let themselves get distracted along the way, which, given the development history of this game, is a small miracle. Had Cold Iron Studios ironed out some of the technical issues, and had they made some adjustments to smooth out the single-player experience, I'd be whacking a strong recommendation on this one. But even with these issues, this is still a great title that is perfect to play through with some mates, Aliens fans or not. This is great, I loved it, I recommend it, let me show you why. Let's knock over the technical stuff first, since that's probably the weakest part of the package. I actually played a preview of this a few weeks back, and it was pretty shaky then in terms of frame rates and stability and netcode. I'm pleased to say that the release build is better, but it's still far from perfect, and if you're someone that demands a seamless experience, you may want to hold off for a few patches to roll through. In terms of the PC menu, it's okay. It's got a toggle for motion blur and a toggle for VSync. Sadly, there's no FOV slider, which is going to be a problem for anyone who finds this perspective a little too tight. I'm fine with it, but I think people who suffer from motion sickness might struggle a little. I played it on keyboard and mouse, but controller is also an option. I didn't do that because I have a keyboard and mouse. You can rebind all keys and all buttons on the controller, which is great. Performance-wise, I tested this on an RTX 3080 running at 1440p max settings. I played with 2 other people, one who was on a 2080 Ti and the other on a 2070, and both of them were running at 1080p on medium settings. My frame rates were generally pretty steady, hovering at around the 80 to 100 frames mark with some minor dips here and there, never below 60 though. My friends, on the other hand, different story. The person on the 2080 Ti was getting frame drops on more than one occasion, and my friend on the 2070 was often complaining about frame drops. They were both at 1080p medium settings, mind you, so that's a little concerning. It was never unplayable for either of them. It didn't affect their gameplay. It wasn't like they stuttered and suddenly got KO'd by an alien, but it was something that they both noticed. I suggest that if you're picking this up on PC, you play around with the settings, and if you can't get it stable on your rig, make use of Steam's 2-hour refund policy. None of us had any crashes during our 10-hour playthrough of the game's campaign, but we did have multiple instances of people disconnecting at the start of a mission, something that also affected me when I did my preview. This was actually a huge bummer since people can't join you during the middle of a mission. They cannot join you after you've started, and they cannot rejoin if they get disconnected. When they get DC'd, you just have to either go on without them or restart the mission. If you do restart, you'll burn your consumable cards, which we'll come back to later, but they're a pretty valuable resource to lose, so yeah, these disconnect issues are a big problem. Outside of that, we also encountered quite a few bugs, and I'm not just talking about xenomorphs. We encountered regular audio glitches where sound would loop, where dialogue would play twice on top of itself, where we couldn't interact with items. In one instance, my friend just couldn't walk through a door that the rest of us could walk through. It was an invisible wall for him. We were halfway through the mission at that point, so that just meant that we left him to die, and then we just went on and finished the mission without him. It's the Colonial Marines motto, leave that man behind. So did any of this ruin our playthrough? No. Was it annoying? Yes, it was. Everyone's tolerance on this stuff is different, but if you were to ask me, should I hold off on this? I'd say, I don't think so, unless you're someone that really demands your games are 100% technically flawless before you play them. If you can roll with the punches a little bit, I think you're still going to have a good time. Just expect to be rudely interrupted on occasion. Aliens Colonial Marines begins here in character creation, where you can apply minor alterations to your weird, waxy looking character model. There isn't a huge amount here, but it's enough given the budget nature of the title and the fact that most of the time you'll be staring at the back of your character's head rather than the front. A short cutscene later, which is actually the only cutscene in the entire game, mind you, you appear in a large docking bay which serves as your base of operations. There's a few NPCs about and icons tell you who you need to speak to. You can click on people for some brief exposition dumps.
Its owners seek some company. Reported the refinery was destroyed.
You'll notice that they don't move their mouths when they speak. This is one of those things I mentioned earlier where the developer was like, does lip syncing really add to our game? No? Cut it. That's Aliens Fireteam Elite in a nutshell. Story was also one of the casualties of this approach. To be fair, there is a story here, but it's really not why you would want to play this game. It's very familiar stuff about Weyland-Yutani being up to their old tricks, and you go somewhere with company orders, and oh no, Weyland-Yutani lied to you. I can't believe they did that. It's limited because all of this has to be told through these static dialogue sequences in the docking bay and over radio comms during missions, and all of that is happening when you've got 13 xenomorphs running at you, and your friends are yelling at you over Discord, etc. Co-op games like this have typically pushed story aside in favor of quick, skippable story morsels, and Aliens Fireteam Elite takes the same approach. But while the game vacates the field in the story department, it spares very little detail when it comes to the authenticity of the alien source material. I mean, just listen to this gun. The first time I heard this, I was like, okay, these people know what they're doing. The sound effect sounds so authentic that it almost sounds bad, like it was directly pulled from the movie and dumped straight into the game's audio files. Like if you were to design a weapon sound today, there is no way you would make it sound like this, right? It sounds too canned. But this is the Colonial Marines M41A, and that is how it sounds. And Cold Iron Studios didn't think to themselves, oh, we can do this better update it. They just said, no, this is how it should sound in our game because this is how it sounds in the movies, and I love that. It doesn't stop there, of course. There's the armor and the dropship, and you can unlock a flamethrower, and every second card is named after some moment in the movie, like, it's a dry heat, and they're coming out of the walls, man, and game over, man, game over! God, I miss Bill Paxton, what a fucking legend. Anyway, best of all, the Demolisher class has that hip-mounted machine gun so you can feel like a badass like Vasquez, but you'll never be half the badass Vasquez was.
Hey Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
All of this fan service is before we get to the level design, and holy shit, I really went into this with pretty low expectations because, you know, budget title and whatever. Man, some of these levels, amazing. It starts with a classic Nostromo-inspired, steamy, claustrophobic labyrinths of steel and wiring and bulkheads and lo-fi sci-fi, and in the next cut it smash cuts to Promethean ruins, lofty, spacious stone carvings opening into big skyboxes and huge combat spaces. Just as you start to get comfortable there, you're again pushed underground, deep into the laboratories of the progenitor race that engineered the black liquid that started this whole mess, their mighty stone faces towering over you as monuments to their own genius and arrogance. Leaving no stone unturned, the final act sends you straight into the heart of an alien hive, its sweaty black chitin having overtaken every inch of the human facility that now only acts as host. Built into each of these spaces is a deep appreciation for their inspirations. Again, Cold Iron weren't trying to serve up their own unique, fresh take on an alien hive like some high school teacher trying to modernize Shakespeare. It looks exactly how you'd expect it to look here, but it's a playable, explorable space. You can almost feel that dry heat as you move through it. When you see these stone statues, you feel the same awe that the members of the Prometheus crew did. But the impact of these spaces isn't reserved for fans of the film alone. I played this with two of my mates, one of whom was a big Aliens fan, and the other had never seen any of the films. I know, don't worry, we roasted him plenty. My mate who was an Aliens fan was loving it, constantly pointing out things to me since the game is littered with so many Easter eggs. Meanwhile, my other mate was just as impressed by these spaces. Blank slate, no expectations, I could hear in his voice how much he appreciated this level design. This isn't surprising because the design of both Aliens and Prometheus is incredible, so when Cold Iron managed to authentically recreate that, of course people are going to be impressed by it. This level design isn't just nostalgia and it's not just pretty, it's also highly functional. Each of the 4 acts takes on its own playstyle identity owing to its setting. There are weapons in this game like the flamethrower or the shotgun which are going to be woefully ineffective in the Promethean ruins because the levels are just too large, too spaced out, and your foe's too distant. Similarly, try taking a sniper rifle into the Hive and see how far that gets you. Aliens Fireteam Elite is one of the better paced horde-style shooter games I've played, not only because it knows when and how to change up its scenery, but because it knows how to use that scenery to change up the flow of gameplay, which in turn will prompt you to make changes to your squad composition, the abilities and perks and weapons you bring, and how you work together as a team. Probably a good time to talk about all that stuff then. Aliens Fireteam Elite is a squad-based shooter, in case you haven't realized that already. I'm just making it clear. Squad sizes are capped at 3, which is actually a bit of a bummer because there are actually 5 classes available and it would have been great to squeeze 1 or 2 more people into a squad. I do get it though, that decision would have had huge ramifications for things like level design, enemy health, etc. What's there works really well, so obviously the developers knew what they were doing. Each of the 5 classes have a distinct identity that comes from the weapons they use, the abilities they bring into the field, and their passive perks. The gunner, for example, doesn't look like he adds much to a squad until you realize that his stacking damage passive absolutely shreds enemies. And when he pops his overload, granting the entire team bonus damage and rate of fire, you're definitely glad that he's there. There's a medic type who does healy things, very handy given how limited the health kits are. There's a recon class who will debuff enemies and provide bonus ammo. A technician who's able to place and pick up turrets, extremely handy pretty much always. And then there's the demolisher who packs those hip-mounted heavy weapons like miniguns, rocket launchers, and flamethrowers. The best compliment I can pay these classes is that I really miss each class when we don't bring them with us. Each class has capabilities that feel indispensable, and in every engagement you're thinking to yourself, oh, it would have been great to have this ability here, or this weapon type here. But at the same time, no matter what you bring, it always works. Classes have distinct strengths and weaknesses, but they also have a baseline utility that means you can play whatever you like, and content will never feel like it's been designed with specific class requirements in mind. Next to the level design, I think the class customization was the thing that impressed me most about Aliens Fireteam. There aren't a huge number of weapons, but each of them are there for a reason and allow you to carve out a playstyle. There are 3 mod slots for each, and the attachments do provide significant increases to things like reload speed, stability, rates of fire, etc. Each weapon also gets leveled up the more you use them, unlocking passive perks that make the weapon significantly more powerful, encouraging you to spend time with different weapons to unlock their potential. The abilities are where it gets really interesting. There's this clever perk board in effect where you drop tiles onto it and link them to your abilities to increase their damage or reduce their cooldown timers, etc. It's almost like this Resident Evil inventory management minigame where it all needs to fit in there, and the higher level your character, the more space you have to fit stuff in. There's a lot of these perks to unlock, and I think this is going to provide a big incentive for people to stick with the game after their first playthrough of the campaign. There are 5 difficulties here, each one turning a separate dial to make things that little bit harder. We played through it on the standard difficulty, which was no cakewalk by the way. There were definitely some hairy moments in there. We also played through some of the 3rd difficulty, which is definitely a step up. And then we tried the final difficulty, where we just got immediately KO'd in the first room. When it comes to these sorts of games, the high-end difficulty tuning is definitely a big question mark, but it's one I can't answer yet as I haven't spent enough time with those higher difficulties to form a view. But yeah, the lower difficulties, they feel great, always tough but fair. If you want to make things really interesting, there's this challenge card system. These are consumable cards that you buy from the quartermaster. You can also earn them from completing daily and weekly quests, and they apply some really crazy variables to your missions, like you move 20% slower, or every xenomorph you face is actually a suicidal exploding acid bomb, or your weapons have a chance to jam up when they're firing, or you have 80% less health during the mission. Each of these challenges obviously has benefits associated with them, like bonus credits or bonus XP if you meet the conditions during a mission, and they're all great. Recently, Back 4 Blood had its beta, and it has its own challenge card system, but it felt a lot more subtle, at least from the cards that we'd unlocked there. A lot of people felt like those cards weren't really impactful enough. Here they are unmistakable, and they significantly change up each run in ways that are a mix of frustration and fun, but the rewards are worth it and they're entirely optional, so you just choose your poison. I've briefly spoken about how level design really influences the flow of combat here, and the other big variable is of course enemy types. Cold Iron went deep into Alien's extended lore to pull out a range of xenomorphs, including drones, warriors, and Praetorians. They spawn at different points as you mow through fodder, and they always have a distinct audio cue, allowing your team to focus up, get in position, pop your cooldowns, and burn them down. Later on, you'll start facing off against Wayland Yutani synths, including the Working Joes from Alien Isolation. These enemies are really important because they are ranged focused. They'll sit behind cover and pepper you with assault rifles or snipe you. They force you to play completely differently from when you're facing xenomorphs, because almost all of them just run directly at you. You definitely need to bring the right tools to the job here, and also rely on your teammates to do the things that you can't. This brings me to that point about solo play. So first of all, to its credit, the game does offer an offline solo play mode where you are playing with 2 AI bots. The bots are pretty good actually. They get kills, they shoot aliens that have pinned you down, etc. Having said that, they have their limits. They don't put out the same damage that you do in terms of, accuracy and uptime, etc. And they also don't focus priority targets as much as you'd like. They also don't have any abilities, which is a big deal because this game is very reliant on squad composition. There's no option to play solo without AI teammates in a mode where enemy density has been scaled down to make the whole thing work solo. Again, I get why that's the case. That would have been a really big feature for the developers to implement. The net effect though is that this game doesn't really work when you're playing on higher difficulties with AI teammates, to the point where the game menus actually say to you, don't do this. AI synth companions not recommended. There is matchmaking available, so you'll never have to play solo while the player population remains high. Eventually though, that population will drop off and this will become an issue. If you're looking to pick this up after the launch window, just be aware that you may want to wrangle in some friends. That's probably a good jumping off point to wrap up this video, the future. So Cold Iron have already said that they plan to support this game into the future with free seasonal content updates. No words on what that stuff is yet, but it's sure to be a mix of new environments, new weapons, etc. There are microtransactions in this game, but they're for the cosmetics only, and frankly that's fine if it's funding free future content, so long as the prices aren't too crazy. I would be really happy to see this game continue to get updates, solidify a community, and continue to grow. I think this is very good. I really, honestly, genuinely think that this is great. It doesn't have the polish of Gears of War or Division or even Back 4 Blood, but it nailed everything it was trying to nail. It's a very competent third-person cover-based horde shooter. It's a very authentic recreation of the Alien universe. It has some really strong level and art design. It has 5 really well thought out functional classes that synergize well together. It has deep but accessible customization options. Most importantly, Alien's Fireteam is chock full of tense, nail-biting last stand moments that will have you and your mates excitedly yelling at each other as you try and bring down a charging Praetorian. Cold Iron didn't just slap an alien coat of paint on a dollar store horde shooter. They are very clearly talented combat designers who know how to combine weapons, abilities, enemy design, level design, and difficulty tuning to arrive at very memorable encounters. If you're an Aliens fan who has friends, this is a must play, and if you're an Aliens fan with no friends, maybe you should try and make some friends so you can play this with them. It'll be worth it. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down so I know to do better for next time. If you enjoyed yourself, consider subscribing, and if you really enjoyed yourself, maybe consider hitting that notification bell so you never miss a video. You can see my patrons here on the left. They're awesome. They're amazing. If you want to join them, check out my Patreon page. Thank you again. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.